In the forest, the very air began to smell of ancient dust and old graves. Amara wanted to run. She looked behind her, but the path had vanished. The trees had closed ranks like a prison wall. Cole, or the thing that was once Cole, turned to her. He was half bone now, a grotesque mosaic of a man and a monument. "Do not cry, Amara," he rattled. "You wanted a husband who was not common. You wanted a love that was not of the earth. Well, here is your wedding. The forest is our cathedral. The vultures are our witnesses." At the fourth river, Cole stopped to return his grace. He unhinged his arms and legs, the long, elegant limbs that had walked so proudly through the market. He handed them to a spirit that looked like a giant spider. Now, Cole was nothing but a torso and a head, floating and dragging himself forward with supernatural strength. "Look at me, Amara," he laughed, a sound that was just wind whistling through a hole. "Am I not still your prince? Am I not still the one who brought you the indigo silk?" Amara fell to her knees in the gray mud. She looked at her hands. The beautiful rings Cole had given her were turning into rusted iron. The beads were turning into human teeth. She realized then that her golden prince was a scavenger. He was a creature made of parts borrowed from 1,000 different tragedies. "We are almost there," the thing said. They were approaching the threshold of the Skull Kingdom. The wedding was not a ceremony of rings and wine. It was a ceremony of silence. Around them, thousands of white shapes began to emerge from the trees. Not ghosts, but skulls. Pure, bleached bone. They watched with empty sockets as the girl from Ndala was led into the house with no shadow. "In your village," they say, "till death do us part," Cole hissed, his jawbone clicking. "But here, death is only the beginning of the marriage." Amara looked up. She was no longer in the forest. She was in a chamber of white. The walls were made of ribs. The floor was made of teeth. And there stood her husband, a complete, grinning skull. Here, Amara is forced to confront the reality of her choice in a place where time and life have no meaning. Have you ever stood in a place where the sun is forgotten? Amara stood in the center of a hall that defied the laws of the living. It was the house of Cole. There were no windows, yet there was a light, a pale, sourceless glow that made everything look like the underside of a mushroom. The walls were not made of mud or wood. They were woven from the ribs of those who had lost their way. The ceiling was a canopy of finger bones, hanging like wind chimes, clicking together whenever a draft of cold air passed through the room. Cole, now a naked bleached skull resting atop a cage of collarbones, sat upon a throne of obsidian. He no longer wore the silk. He no longer wore the skin. He was truth without the lie. "Welcome home, Amara of Ndala," he rattled. The sound did not come from a throat, but from the vibration of his jaw against his skull. "You asked for a palace. You asked for a prince who did not smell of the farm. Look around you. There is no dust here. There is no sweat. There is only the eternal white." Amara backed away, her heels clicking on a floor made of tightly packed teeth. She bumped into something cold. She turned and screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the heavy air. Standing in the corner were 3 women. Or they had been women once. Now they were translucent shadows, their skins stretched thin like parchment, their eyes wide and fixed. They held brooms made of human hair, sweeping the floor with rhythmic, mechanical motions. "Who are they?" Amara gasped, her voice a fragile thread. "They are my previous perfections," Cole hissed. "One came for the gold, one came for the fame, one came because she hated her father. Like you, they wanted a life without roots. So I gave them what they desired, I took away their heavy flesh. I took away their demanding blood. Now they are light. Now they are eternal. One of the shadow women turned her head toward Amara. Her lips did not move, but a thought entered Amara's mind. A cold, damp thought. Eat nothing. Drink nothing. If you swallow the seeds of this place, your bones will forget the way back to the earth. Cole gestured with a skeletal hand. A table appeared, carved from a single giant thigh bone. Upon it were bowls of fruit that looked like rubies and jars of wine that shimmered like liquid gold. "You must be hungry, my bride," Cole said. "You have traveled far. Eat of the fruit of the silent land. It will take away the ache in your heart. It will make the memories of Ndala feel like a dream you had in a fever." Amara looked at the fruit. It was beautiful. It was exactly what she had always wanted. Perfection without blemish. But then she remembered her mother's voice. A calabash that shines may still be cracked. She looked closer. Under the pale light, she saw that the fruit had no scent. The wine did not bubble. It was a feast of ash and illusion. "I am not hungry, my lord," she whispered. Cole's empty sockets flared with a dim green fire. "In this house, the bride obeys. If you do not eat, you are still tethered to the world of the breathing. And I did not bring you here to remain a guest. I brought you here to be a part of the foundation." Cole drifted closer. The cold radiating from him was so intense, it began to frost Amara's eyelashes. "Give me your hand," he commanded. Amara looked at her finger. She was still wearing the ring Cole had given her in the market, the one that now looked like a rusted shackle. "The ring is a seed," Cole whispered. "It is growing roots into your marrow. Soon you will not be able to lift your arm. Soon your heart will slow to the pace of a stone. And then we shall truly be one." Amara felt it, a heaviness in her blood, a tiredness that made her want to lie down on the floor of teeth and sleep forever. She realized that the love she had chased was a vacuum. It was a hole that could never be filled. Cole did not love her beauty. He was hungry for her life. He was a scavenger who needed the warmth of the living to keep his cold kingdom from crumbling into dust. In that moment of absolute despair, Amara did something she had never done in Ndala. She stopped looking at herself. She stopped thinking of her beauty. She thought of the dust of Ndala. She thought of the smell of the rain on the red earth. She thought of her mother's calloused hands and her father's loud, annoying laugh. She realized that the common things were the only things that were real. She looked at the shadow women sweeping in the corner. She saw a flicker of a tear on one of their faces, a tear that turned into a pearl and fell to the floor. Amara reached into her memory. She didn't look for a weapon of iron. She looked for a weapon of the soul. She began to hum. It was a small song, a song for planting yams, a song of the earth. Cole recoiled. He let out a sound like dry wood snapping. "Stop that! That sound has no place here. There is no growth in the land of skulls. There is only the end." But Amara did not stop. The song was a rope, and she began to climb. Cole did not trap Amara in a room. He did not need to. He led her out of the house with no shadow to show her the extent of his empire. Outside, there was no sky, only a vast gray vault of swirling mist. There was no sun, but the ground itself glowed with a cold phosphoric light. Amara looked out and saw forests of white coral, but they were not coral. They were trees made of calcified spines, their branches interlocking like the fingers of 1,000 beggars. There were rivers, but the water did not flow. It was a thick silver mercury, that reflected nothing but the emptiness above. You wanted to be a queen. Cole's jaw clicked, gesturing to the wasteland. Look upon your subjects. From the bone forests they emerged. The skulls, thousands upon thousands of them. They had no bodies, no limbs, no skin. They hopped and rolled and floated across the gray plain. Some were ancient and yellowed. Others were fresh and white as new milk. They were the ones who had followed beauty without substance. They were the ones who had traded their names for a stranger's promise. They gathered around Amara, their empty sockets tilted upward. They didn't speak, but their presence was a scream. One of us, the beautiful one, has come to join the dust. In the center of this kingdom was a mockery of the Ndala market. Here, the skulls traded things that had no value to the living. They traded whispers. They traded the memory of the smell of rain. They traded the sound of a mother's voice for a moment's respite from the cold. Amara saw a skull holding a tattered piece of blue cloth. It was a scrap of the very silk she had been so proud to wear. "That was mine!" she cried out. The skull turned to her. Its voice was like a dry wind through a cave. "Nothing is yours here, daughter of the sun. In the kingdom of skulls, we do not own things. Things own us. The silk you loved, it is now the shroud that binds your spirit." Cole laughed, a hollow rattling sound that shook the bone trees. "Do you see now, Amara? In your village, you were a prize. Here, you are just more calcium for the soil. Your beauty is a flickering candle in a hurricane. Soon, it will go out, and you will be as smooth and white and nameless as the rest." Amara felt the weight of the kingdom pressing down on her. The cold was no longer just on her skin. It was in her thoughts. She began to forget the name of her father. She began to forget the color of the Ndala River. She looked at her hands. They were becoming pale, translucent. But then, she felt something hard in the fold of her wrapper. Something she had forgotten was there. When she had left her home, in her haste and vanity, she had accidentally swept a single kola nut into the pocket of her dress, a nut that had fallen from her father's offering bowl. She touched it. It was small. It was brown. It was wrinkled. It was the only thing in this kingdom that had a soul. It was the only thing that had ever known the sun. The moment her fingers brushed the dry skin of the kola nut, a jolt of heat raced up her arm. It was like a spark hitting dry tinder. "I am Amara," she whispered to herself. "Daughter of Okoro, daughter of Neka. I am a child of the red earth, not the white bone." She knew she could not fight Cole with strength. He was a king here. She was a ghost in waiting. She began to watch the way the skulls moved. She noticed that they never looked behind them. To a skull, there is no past, only the eternal, frozen present. They moved in straight lines, or they rolled in circles. She remembered the words of the oldest man of Ndala. "If you find yourself in the land where the sun never shines, walk as the crab walks. Do not go where you are looking. Go where you have been." Amara realized the secret. The kingdom of skulls was built on the desire for the next thing, the next gift, the next beauty, the next pride. To escape, she had to desire the old thing. She began to pray, not with her lips, Cole would hear her, but with her blood. She hummed the rhythm of the pounding yam. She visualized the smoke of the morning fires. She began to feed the tiny kola nut with her own warmth, keeping the spark of the living world alive in the center of the dead one. Cole saw the change in her. He saw the color returning to her cheeks, but he misunderstood it. "Ah," he rattled, approaching her. "The transition is nearly complete. You are glowing with the light of the dead. Come, Amara. Tonight, we feast on the memories of your village. Once you give them to me, you will be free of the burden of being human. Amara looked at him, and for the first time, she did not feel terror. She felt pity. Yes, Cole, she said, her voice steady. Tonight, everything will be settled. She was lying. For the first time in her life, Amara was using her beauty not as a mirror, but as a mask. She was waiting for the moment when the mists shifted. She was waiting for the moment to run, not forward into her throne, but backward into the arms of the ancestors she had rejected. The hour of the shadowless moon had arrived. Cole stood before Amara, his skeletal hand extended, ready to take the last of her memories. He wanted the name of her mother. He wanted the secret of her birth. "Give it to me," he hissed, his jaw clicking in anticipation. "Give me the name, and the weight of your life will vanish forever." Amara looked at him. She looked at the King of Skulls. And then, she did the one thing no one in that kingdom ever did. She laughed. It was not the brittle, vain laughter of the village girl. It was the roar of a woman who had found her soul in the mouth of a lion. Before Cole could react, Amara reached into her pocket. She didn't pull out gold. She pulled out the cola nut. "Here is my name," she cried. She bit the nut in half and spat the juice onto the white, dusty floor. The reaction was instant. In a world of dry bone, the juice of the living was like acid. The floor began to smoke. The house with no shadow groaned as if the very ribs of the earth were breaking. Amara turned. She did not run forward toward the gates. She remembered the wisdom of the crab. She ran backward. She closed her eyes and pictured the market of Ndala. She pictured the red dust. She pictured the way back across the 7 rivers. "Stop her!" Cole's voice was a scream that shattered the bone trees. "She carries the seed of the living. She carries the warmth." The skulls began to move. They didn't run. They rolled. Thousands of white spheres clattering against each other. A tidal wave of bone chasing one girl in a tattered silk dress. She reached the 7th river, the one where Cole had returned his limbs. The spider spirits blocked her path. Amara reached into her hair and pulled out a small wooden comb, the last common thing she possessed. "This was carved from the Iroko of my fathers," she shouted. She threw the comb into the dark water. The comb did not sink. It grew. It turned into a bridge of living wood, its leaves sprouting and blooming in an instant. The spirits recoiled. They could not touch the wood of a sacred tree. Amara sprinted across as the bridge dissolved behind her. By the 5th river, the skulls were at her heels. Cole was leading them, his torso dragging through the mud, his empty sockets glowing with a murderous green fire. "You cannot leave, Amara," he rattled. "You signed the contract with your heart's desire. You belong to the silence." She reached the 3rd river, the river of flesh. To cross it, the spirits demanded a toll. They wanted her skin. They wanted her beauty. Amara didn't hesitate. She took the shimmering, cursed indigo silk, the dress that had started her downfall, and ripped it from her body. She threw it into the faces of the pursuing skulls. "Take it," she cried. "Take the beauty that has no heart. Take the silk that has no soul." The skulls fell upon the fabric, fighting each other to touch the shimmering cloth. For a moment, the chase slowed. Amara ran on, now dressed only in her simple undergarment, her feet bleeding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest began to change. The gray mists were thinning. The smell of rot was being replaced by the smell of damp earth. But Cole was gaining. He had borrowed the legs of a cheetah spirit for one last desperate hunt. He was a blur of white bone and green fire, leaping through the trees. "Amara!" She saw it, the boundary of Ndala, the great Iroko tree that marked the edge of the human world. She felt a cold hand brush her heel. The cold was so intense it felt like fire. Her leg went numb. She stumbled. In the silence, she heard a sound. The first light of dawn hit the highest leaves of the Iroko. Kole let out a sound that was not human. It was the sound of a dream being burned by the sun. He lunged one last time, his skeletal fingers reaching for her throat. Amara threw herself forward, her fingers digging into the red, warm mud of Ndala. The sun broke over the horizon. Kole hit the sunlight. He did not bleed. He did not die as a man dies. He simply unraveled. The borrowed bones turned into dry twigs. The borrowed eyes turned into pebbles. The borrowed voice turned into the rustle of dead leaves. The great king of skulls was nothing but a pile of forest debris. Amara lay on the red earth, her face pressed into the dirt. She breathed in the smell of the village. It was the smell of sweat. It was the smell of wood smoke. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. She had escaped the kingdom. But the girl who crawled back into Ndala that morning was not the same girl who had left it at midnight. The sun was fully awake when Amara reached the village square. But she did not run to her mother's arms. She did not cry out for help. She walked slowly. Her feet were bare and stained with the gray ash of the Skull Kingdom. Her hair, which had been the color of a raven's wing, was now streaked with white. Not the white of old age, but the white of one who has seen the frost of the underworld. The people of Ndala stopped. The women carrying water pots froze. They did not see the beauty of the village. They saw a woman who had walked through the fire and returned as a shadow. Amara walked to the center of the market, to the very spot where she had first met Cole. She stood there until her father, Okoro, and her mother, Naneka, pushed through the crowd. Naneka let out a wail that tore the morning air. She reached out to touch her daughter's face, but she stopped. There was a coldness radiating from Amara's skin, a lingering echo of the house with no shadow. "I have come home," Amara said. Her voice was no longer a melody. It was deep. It was heavy. It sounded like the earth itself speaking. "But I have brought the silence with me." The elders led her to the sacred stream. They did not ask her questions. Not yet. They knew that a soul that has been to the land of skulls must be tethered back to the world of the living with great care. They washed her in water, infused with bitter herbs, and the sap of the Iroko. As the water ran off her body, it turned gray, the dust of the dead flowing back into the ground. When she was clean, they wrapped her in simple, hand-woven cotton. No silk, no beads, no gold. Amara looked at the rough fabric and wept. She wept for the vanity that had nearly turned her into a broom carrier for a monster. She wept for the common things she had once despised. Years passed in Ndala. Amara never married. She never sought the gaze of a man again. Instead, she became the keeper of the threshold. She sat at the edge of the village, under the great Iroko. Whenever a stranger approached, whenever a handsome face with two perfect words walked off the forest path, the young girls of the village would look to Amara. She wouldn't speak. She would only lift her hand and point to the ground. She was reminding them to look for the shadow. She was reminding them to look for the feet. The young men of the village no longer brought her flowers. They brought her their doubts. They brought her their questions. "Amara," they would ask, "is this path safe?" And she would answer, only if your heart is heavier than your eyes. Voice dropping to a deep, intimate whisper. Elders, mothers, fathers, and you, the children of the listening ear. The fire is dying now. The embers are turning to gray. The story of Amara is not a story of the past. It is a story of tonight. In your world, Cole still walks. He does not always wear borrowed skin. Sometimes he wears borrowed promises. Sometimes he wears the shape of a dream that tells you your home is not enough. Sometimes he wears the face of a life that looks perfect on the outside, but has no marrow within. Do not be blinded by the shimmering silk. Do not be deafened by the honeyed flute. Before you follow a stranger into the dark, ask him where he keeps his ancestors. Ask him what he swallows when he eats. And above all, look at his shadow. Because not all husbands are men, and not every palace is built for the living. The night is long, but the morning comes for those who stay on the path. Go to your mats, sleep. But remember the girl who married a stranger. Ndala remembers. The forest remembers. And now, you remember.